They found 127 bodies stacked like firewood in the basement. Some had been there for decades. Welcome to another dark chapter from medical history that they tried to bury forever. In 1889, in the fog-covered hills of Staten Island, New York, stood the Willowbrook State Hospital. What appeared to be a place of healing became something far more sinister. Behind its brick walls and barred windows, doctors weren't just treating patients, they were collecting them. The truth about what happened in those basement chambers would remain hidden for over 60 years, until one maintenance worker made a discovery that would shake the medical world to its core. This is the story of the hospital that turned healing into horror, where death wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of a much darker journey. Staten Island in the late 1800s was a place where New York City sent its unwanted. The island served as a dumping ground for the sick, the poor, and the mentally ill. Far from the bustling streets of Manhattan, it was the perfect place to hide society's problems. Willowbrook State Hospital opened its doors in 1889 with grand promises. The red brick building stretched across acres of rolling hills with tall windows that let in natural light and gardens where patients could walk. Dr. Edmund Hartwell, the hospital's first director, spoke of revolutionary treatments and compassionate care. But from the very beginning, something was wrong. Local residents reported strange smells drifting from the hospital rounds on cold winter nights. The horse-drawn carriages that delivered patients to Willowbrook arrived full, but left empty, and the morgue, built to hold 12 bodies, somehow never seemed to reach capacity, despite the hospital's alarmingly high death rate. Dr. Hartwell was a man of average height, with sharp eyes and hands that never seemed to stop moving. He had trained in Germany, where he claimed to have learned advanced techniques for treating the mentally ill. What he had really learned was something far more disturbing. In his private journal, discovered decades later, Hartwell wrote, "The human mind is a puzzle, and each death provides another piece. To waste such opportunities in the ground would be criminal." Mary Sullivan arrived at Willowbrook State Hospital on a gray October morning in 1891. She was 23 years old, with red hair and green eyes that had once been full of life. Her family had committed her after she began hearing voices following the death of her infant son. Mary was assigned to Ward C, where the hospital kept its most difficult patients. The ward was overcrowded, with beds pushed so close together that patients could barely move between them. The windows were painted shut, trapping the smell of unwashed bodies and desperation inside. Dr. Hartwell took a special interest in Mary. He visited her daily, asking detailed questions about her visions and voices. He recorded everything in his leather-bound notebook, documenting each symptom with scientific precision. 3 weeks after her arrival, Mary Sullivan died in her sleep. The official cause of death was listed as melancholia with complications. Her body was prepared for burial, but it never made it to the cemetery. Instead, Mary Sullivan disappeared into the basement of Willowbrook State Hospital, where she would remain for the next 73 years. She wasn't alone. The basement of Willowbrook State Hospital was accessible through a narrow staircase hidden behind the hospital's main kitchen. The stairs were steep and worn smooth by decades of use. At the bottom, a heavy wooden door opened into a world that existed outside of law, morality, and human decency. Dr. Hartwell had converted the basement into what he called his research facility. The main room was lined with metal shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. On these shelves, arranged with scientific precision, were glass jars of human organs preserved in formaldehyde. But the jars were just the beginning. In the back rooms of the basement, Dr. Hartwell had created something far more disturbing. Complete human bodies were stored in wooden crates, preserved in chemicals that kept them from decay. Each crate was labeled with a number, a date, and a brief description of the person's mental condition. Crate 47, female, age 23, auditory hallucinations, died October 1891. That was Mary Sullivan. Hit that notification bell. You'll want to see what happens next. Dr. Hartwell wasn't collecting bodies for mere curiosity. He was conducting experiments that pushed the boundaries of medical ethics beyond any recognizable limit. His goal was to map the physical differences between normal and those of the mentally ill. Using crude surgical tools, he would remove organs from the preserved bodies, studying them under primitive microscopes. He measured skulls, weighed brains, and dissected nervous systems, all in pursuit of what he believed to be groundbreaking discoveries about the nature of mental illness. His methods were brutal and unscientific. He had no control groups, no peer review, and no oversight. He was operating in complete secrecy, using stolen bodies as his laboratory specimens. In one journal entry from 1894, Hartwell wrote, "Specimen number 73 shows unusual brain tissue density in the frontal lobe region. Further study required. The family believes the body was buried in Greenwood Cemetery. They are mistaken. The families weren't just mistaken, they were being deliberately deceived. When patients died at Willowbrook, their families received official death certificates and burial notifications. They were told their loved ones had been laid to rest in the hospital cemetery with full dignity and respect. Some families even held memorial services at empty graves. But the bodies never made it to those graves. Instead, they were taken to the basement, where Dr. Hartwell continued his twisted research on their remains. By 1895, Dr. Hartwell had perfected his system of deception. He employed a small group of orderlies who helped him move bodies from the morgue to the basement. These men were paid extra for their silence and their willingness to participate in what Hartwell called advanced medical research. Thomas Creek was one of these orderlies. A large man with calloused hands and a drinking problem, Creek had worked at the hospital since its opening. In a statement given years later, he described the process. "We'd wait until after midnight when the night shift was smallest. The doctor would select which bodies were going down to the basement. We'd wrap them in canvas and carry them down the back stairs. The doctor was very specific about how they should be arranged on the shelves." The hospital's record-keeping became increasingly creative. Death certificates listed causes of death, but burial records were falsified. Families were sent bills for funeral services that never happened. Cemetery plots were sold and marked with headstones, but the graves remained empty. The hospital's board of directors, if they suspected anything, chose to look the other way. Willowbrook was profitable, and Dr.
Dr. Hartwell's reputation in the medical community was growing. He had published several papers on the anatomical differences between normal and abnormal brains, work that was being cited by doctors across the country. What the medical community didn't know was that Hartwell's research was based entirely on stolen bodies and illegal experiments. Over the course of 15 years, Dr. Hartwell's basement collection grew to include 127 bodies. These weren't just numbers in his research journals. They were people with names, families, and stories that deserved to be remembered. James Thompson, age 34, had been a successful shopkeeper before suffering a mental breakdown following a fire that destroyed his business. His wife visited him every week until he died of pneumonia in 1893. She never knew his body was being used for experiments, just floors below where she had said her final goodbye. Sarah Chen was only 19 when she arrived at Willowbrook. Born to Chinese immigrants, she had been committed after refusing an arranged marriage. Her family was told she died of a heart condition in 1897. In reality, her preserved remains became part of Hartwell's collection, labeled as specimen number 89. Each body in that basement represented a life cut short and a family deceived. They were society's most vulnerable people, stored like laboratory equipment for the convenience of one man's obsession with scientific discovery. Dr. Hartwell's reign at Willowbrook came to an end in 1904, not because of his illegal activities, but because of changing attitudes toward mental health treatment. New regulations required more oversight of state hospitals, and Hartwell's secretive methods were becoming harder to maintain. He quietly resigned from his position and moved to California, where he established a private practice treating wealthy patients with nervous disorders. He took his research notes with him, but left behind his underground collection. The new hospital director, Dr. Margaret Thornton, was told that the basement was used for storage and should remain locked. For the next 60 years, the basement and its grisly contents were forgotten by everyone except a few aging orderlies who had sworn themselves to secrecy. The hospital itself continued operating, treating thousands of patients over the decades. None of them knew they were walking above a hidden cemetery, a place where the dead had been denied their rest in the name of science. On a cold February morning in 1964, maintenance worker Robert Martinez was investigating a water leak in the hospital's basement. Armed with a flashlight and a toolbox, he descended the narrow staircase that hadn't been used in decades. Martinez was looking for a burst pipe when he noticed the wooden door at the far end of the basement. The door was locked, but years of moisture had warped the wood, creating gaps large enough to shine a light through. What he saw in that narrow beam of light changed his life forever.
127 bodies in various states of preservation, thousands of glass jars containing human organs, research notes detailing illegal experiments conducted over a 15-year period, and burial records showing that families had been told their loved ones were resting in peace when they were actually being used as laboratory specimens. The discovery at Willowbrook made national headlines. FBI investigators descended on the hospital, cataloging evidence and trying to piece together decades of deception. The story horrified the public and led to congressional hearings on medical ethics and patient rights. Dr. Hartwell, by then 89 years old and living in a retirement home in Los Angeles, was questioned but never charged. The statute of limitations had long since expired on most of his crimes. He died in 1967, taking many of his secrets to the grave. The investigation revealed that Willowbrook wasn't unique.
Similar practices had been carried out at state hospitals across the country, where vulnerable patients were treated as medical specimens rather than human beings. The families of the identified victims were finally told the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. Many had spent decades visiting empty graves, never knowing that their family members were stored in a basement just miles away. The Willowbrook scandal led to sweeping reforms in medical ethics and patient rights. New laws required informed consent for medical procedures and established strict oversight of research involving human subjects. The hospital itself was eventually closed, its buildings demolished in the 1980s. But the damage had already been done. 127 families had been robbed of the chance to properly mourn their loved ones. Generations of people had grown up not knowing the truth about their family history. A memorial garden now stands where Willowbrook State Hospital once operated. 127 trees have been planted, each one representing a life that was stolen not once, but twice. First by illness and institutionalization, then by a system that treated human beings as disposable research materials. The memorial includes a simple inscription, "In memory of those whose final rest was delayed by those who should have protected them." The story of Willowbrook raises uncomfortable questions that still echo today. How many other Dr. Hartwells operated in the shadows of medical history? How many families were deceived about the fate of their loved ones? And most importantly, how do we ensure that such violations of human dignity never happen again? Modern medical ethics were built on the foundation of scandals like Willowbrook. Every informed consent form, every ethics review board, every patient advocate traces its existence back to the recognition that vulnerable people need protection from those who would exploit them in the name of science. But the questions persist. In our rush to advance medical knowledge, do we sometimes forget that patients are people first and subjects second? Are there basements in our modern medical system where inconvenient truths are hidden away? The basement of Willowbrook State Hospital was finally emptied in 1965. The preserved bodies were given proper burials, and the families were allowed to hold the memorial services they had been denied decades earlier. The glass jars and research equipment were destroyed, and the basement was sealed with concrete. But the story of what happened there serves as a permanent reminder of what can occur when medical authority operates without accountability, when vulnerable people are seen as specimens rather than human beings, and when the pursuit of knowledge becomes more important than basic human dignity. Dr. Hartwell believed he was advancing science. In his own mind, he may have genuinely thought his work would help future generations understand mental illness. But his legacy isn't one of scientific discovery. It's a cautionary tale about the danger of unchecked power and the importance of treating every human being with dignity, even in death. The patients of Willowbrook were forgotten twice. Once by the families who committed them to institutional care, and again by the doctor who stole their bodies for his experiments. Their story reminds us that the most vulnerable among us deserve our protection, not our exploitation. In the end, the basement of Willowbrook State Hospital wasn't just a storage room for stolen bodies. It was a testament to what happens when society turns away from its most vulnerable members, leaving them at the mercy of those who see opportunity where others should see responsibility. The dead of Willowbrook finally found their rest, but their story continues to serve as a guardian against the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of institutions we trust with our lives. Drop a comment below. What other dark medical mysteries should we uncover next?